When Daisy Donovan pushed open the door of the box, Wyatt Pearson was hugging a girl, his head buried in her neck, calling her baby. His big eyes were slightly narrowed, his double eyelids were deeply wrinkled, and the corners of his slightly upturned eyes were tinged with red, just like the way he looked every time he acted coquettishly with her. Daisy tightened her grip on the bag, her knuckles raised and slightly white. Nodding to the people around her, she walked over and called him softly. "Wyatt, we should go home." The drunken Wyatt waved his arms to break free from Daisy's hand, and nudged himself into the girl's arms again, saying impatiently, "Who are you? Don't touch me." The girl looked up, and the flickering flash of light hit her face, and her eyebrows and eyes looked somewhat similar to hers. To be precise, they are not similar to her, but they all look a bit like the person Wyatt has in his heart. Daisy was thin and could not bear the force of his blow. She staggered twice before she managed to steady herself, looking a little embarrassed. Wyatt didn't even glance at her, and coaxed the girl in his arms like a treasure. "Baby, I love you so much, baby, please don't leave me, okay?" In the box, there were not only Wyatt's friends but also a few princesses. Everyone's eyes were focused on the three of them. Most of them were there to watch the show. Levi, who usually has the best relationship with Wyatt, rubbed his nose and stepped forward to smooth things over. "Sister Daisy, Wyatt is drunk. Don't bother with him." Daisy smiled at him, and her words were still soft and gentle. "It's okay, I'll leave first, and I'll trouble you to take him home later." After saying that, she walked out of the luxurious VIP box in her high heels without looking back. 1. Daisy wasn't surprised to see Wyatt in her living room. "Have you eaten?" Daisy asked while changing her shoes, as naturally as if what happened last night had never happened. Wyatt leaned on the sofa, holding the remote control and changing the channel. His handsome face showed no emotion. Looking at the pictures jumping on the TV, he replied to her indifferently. "No, why did you come back so late today?" "There was a small car accident on Beijing Road, and the injured were sent to our hospital." Daisy put away her bag, put on an apron, and walked to the kitchen to prepare a meal for Wyatt. "We don't have much food at home, so let's just make some simple noodles tonight." Wyatt didn't say anything good or bad, and just kept changing channels. Daisy didn't ask any more questions. She rolled up her sleeves, took out 2 eggs and 2 tomatoes from the refrigerator, washed them and made sauce. The relationship pattern of an old couple. As soon as the noodles were put into the pot, Wyatt put his arms around Daisy from behind, and his warm lips gently fell on her white and tender neck again and again. Daisy shrank her neck unconsciously, feeling a little itchy. She reached out and pushed him, her voice tinged with seduction. "Stop messing around, we'll have dinner later." Wyatt remained unmoved and attacked the city with even greater abandon. 2. In the end, I didn't get to eat the noodles. When it was over, Wyatt leaned over the bed and reached for the cigarette on the bedside table to light it. Although Daisy doesn't like the smell of cigarettes, she still keeps a pack of Huangalu cigarettes, which he often smokes, on the bedside table. Scarlet flames flickered in the smoke. Daisy dragged her heavy body to take a hot bath, and when she came back, Wyatt had finished his cigarette. "Go wash up. I'll go cook. You should be able to eat after you wash up." Wyatt didn't move, he just raised his eyelids. His long eyelashes cast dark shadows on his eyelids, covering up the emotions in his eyes. He said, "Let's finish it." His voice was calm, just like Daisy asking him if he had eaten was not that common. It's an end, not a breakup. They did everything a couple could do, and Wyatt would hug Daisy and call her his sweetheart when he was acting cute. However, it couldn't change the fact that they were not a couple. In the end, they ended up going their separate ways without even a proper breakup sentence. Daisy blinked a few times, then quickly realized what he had just said. Her voice was still as gentle and soothing as usual. She said, "Okay." Wyatt's heart ached when he didn't expect her to agree so readily. Based on Daisy's tolerance and concessions to him over the past few years, he thought that even if she didn't cry or make a fuss, she would at least try to keep him. Everyone said that Daisy loved Wyatt terribly, even Wyatt himself thought so. "If I didn't love him so deeply, how could I let him have whatever he wanted?" Wyatt was a little annoyed. He got up from the bed, picked up his clothes one by one and put them on. Finally, he took out a bank card from his coat pocket and handed it to Daisy. "There's $3 million in there. Thank you for your help over the next 3 years." Daisy tilted her head to look at him, her delicate eyebrows slightly frowned, and a faint chan shape appeared. After a while she took the bank card and said with a smile, "$1 million a year, Wyatt is really generous." Catching a flash of disdain in Wyatt's eyes, Daisy felt a prickly pain in her heart. Turns out, it does hurt. 3. After Wyatt left Daisy's apartment that day, they lost contact. Although they didn't block each other on WeChat or phone, they tacitly never sent each other messages again. More than a week passed peacefully. Daisy went to the bookstore and bought a bunch of world classics. After work, she came home and curled up on the sofa to read after dinner. Her life was peaceful and fulfilling. Daisy had a complicated surgery in the morning, and it was already past 3 in the afternoon when she came out of the operating room. She pressed the upper left corner of her abdomen, went back to the office, opened a piece of bread and ate it with mineral water, and then she felt better. In their line of work, a major surgery may take more than 10 hours, and it is common for them to change clothes and rush to the operating room immediately in case of emergencies. Therefore, it is difficult to eat 3 meals on time, and it is normal to have some minor stomach problems. Just as she threw the bag into the trash can, a young nurse poked her head in and called her. "Dr. Donovan, someone is looking for you. They say they know you." Daisy thought it was the patient's family member, so she asked the nurse to call them in. Looking at the graceful figure standing in front of her, Daisy was in a trance for a moment. The other party extended her hand generously and introduced herself to her with a smile. "Hello, Ms. Donovan, I have heard of you for a long time. I am Aurora Underwood." Her fingers were slender, white, and soft. Her exquisite nails inlaid with diamonds added a touch of charm. Her facial features were delicate and beautiful, and she looked about 60% like Daisy, familiar but not so familiar. Daisy shook her hand politely, motioned for her to sit down, and then started reading the medical records on the table. Since Aurora had come, she must have something to say, so there was no need for her to ask. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Aurora became a little impatient when she saw Daisy ignoring her. She pinched her throat and said in a delicate voice, "Ms. Donovan must have heard of me. She is not surprised to see me." Daisy raised her eyes and looked at the white lotus that Wyatt had kept in his heart for more than 10 years, and suddenly found it quite funny. "Ms. Underwood, you are too polite. We are WeChat friends, so how can you define our relationship as just hearing each other?" Hearing this, Aurora looked a little embarrassed. A month ago, Daisy received a friend request, which showed that it was a mobile phone number search and ad. Those who knew her number were people she knew, so Daisy agreed without thinking too much. After agreeing to be friends, the other party did not send her a message, but instead posted a circle of friends. "I'm back. The air in my hometown is still sweeter. Thank you, my little cat, for taking time out of your busy schedule to pick me up." The picture shows an arm pulling a suitcase, with Daisy wearing a familiar Armani watch on the wrist. After that day, that person would update his moments almost every day, with pictures of them holding hands or leaning against each other. As a doctor, Daisy is naturally more sensitive and careful than ordinary people, not to mention that she is so familiar with everything about Wyatt. To say that she didn't feel bad was just self-deception. No matter what the reason was for her and Wyatt to get together in the first place, she couldn't help but be moved in the past 3 years. But with such a strong spiritual support, her insignificant feelings for Wyatt seemed even more insignificant. Daisy detached herself from her emotions and put herself in a God's perspective, watching Aurora's show silently, watching Wyatt get drunk for her. She was also waiting for Wyatt to end his relationship with her. Sure enough, Wyatt didn't keep her waiting too long. Wyatt said she was calm at the end because she was prepared for it. After being exposed, Aurora stopped pretending and said coldly, "I've heard about you and Wyatt. I think you should be very clear about your identity. Now that I'm back, I naturally don't need you anymore. I hope you and Wyatt will not have any contact in the future." Daisy shrugged, took out her phone and called Wyatt. "I think you should talk to your Wyatt." As soon as he finished speaking, the call was connected and Daisy pressed the speakerphone. Wyatt's voice sounded a little dry and stiff. "Hey, what's up? Is it convenient for you to come to the hospital now?" Daisy was afraid that he would refuse, so she added, "Miss Underwood is here too." 5. Daisy doesn't have that much time to spend with Aurora. After thinking for a while, she sent a message to Wyatt, "Come and take the person away." Let her rest assured that I won't bother you. After sending the message, Daisy put the pen in her pocket, picked up the medical records, and started to shoo people away. Miss Underwood, please wait outside. I have to go to the ward for rounds. Wyatt Company is currently developing a new project and has been busy like a top these days. He was in a meeting when Daisy called. When he heard the ringtone that belonged only to Daisy, he immediately stopped the marketing manager from speaking. How long had it been since he last heard her voice? A week? Half a month? Wyatt couldn't remember exactly. I actually miss you a little. Wyatt attributed this yearning to habit. Daisy had taken care of him for 3 years without complaint, so it was normal for him to rely on Daisy. The moment Daisy accepted his $3 million without hesitation, Wyatt felt uncomfortable. It wasn't that he felt bad about the money, but he felt that her kindness to him had become a transaction. Does that mean her kindness can be bought with money? Will she be so kind to others in the future when they have money? Wyatt was so obsessed with this matter, and he felt very aggrieved when he was obsessed with it. To put it bluntly, Wyatt was spoiled by Daisy. Now when he got the call from Daisy, he felt aggrieved again and a little nervous. The collision of several small emotions caused his tone to be not very good when he answered the phone. He rushed to the hospital after the meeting, and as soon as he walked into the lobby, he saw Aurora standing there waiting for him. She was dressed in a white gauze dress, looking graceful and elegant, with her long black hair tied loosely behind her head with a ribbon, and her beautiful face attracted many people's attention. She still looks as pure and innocent as I remember. For some reason, he suddenly remembered his first meeting with Daisy. It was also in this hall that she, wearing a white coat and with a plain face, stared straight at him as he sat in a wheelchair. The resemblance to Aurora made him panic for a moment. The crowd was noisy, and the two of them watched from the crowd. Finally, Wyatt was defeated and broke the silence. "Sister, do I look good?" It was originally a sarcastic remark with a little bit of sarcasm, but it unexpectedly made her cry. Daisy walked slowly to his wheelchair and half squatted down, looking up at him, her big almond-shaped eyes misty with tears. She held the wheelchair armrest and asked him gently but firmly, "I'll take care of you from now on, okay?" 6. Aurora also saw Wyatt. She originally wanted to wait for Wyatt to come to her, but Wyatt actually stood at the door and started to stare blankly. Aurora half closed her lower eyelids to hide the emotions in her eyes, gritted her teeth, and when she looked up again, she looked pitifully innocent. She walked forward and took Wyatt's arm, saying coquettishly, "Wyatt, you're here. I just happened to be here to do something today. And I thought I hadn't thanked Miss Donovan for taking care of you over the years, so I came here." Wyatt pulled his arm back without leaving a trace and asked in a low voice, "Where's she?" "Miss Donovan? She's busy." Aurora bit her lower lip, her eyes reddened. She had been back home for more than a month, and Wyatt was still very gentlemanly and considerate to her, but he would unconsciously avoid her touch every time. It's not that she hasn't been loved by him. She was well aware of his abnormality, so she couldn't help but come to the hospital today. "Wyatt, let's go. Miss Donovan is very busy. We shouldn't keep disturbing her." Wyatt glanced in the direction of Daisy's department, hummed lightly, and walked out of the hospital building side by side with Aurora. Wyatt has been really busy these days. The project has reached the most critical stage, and he just ran away from the meeting, leaving a mess behind. On the way to send Aurora home, he received 5 or 6 calls urging him to go back. After dropping the person off at the door of the villa, Wyatt drove back to the company without even bothering to exchange pleasantries. It was already past 10 o'clock in the evening when I finished my work. After pinching the Jingming points on both sides of the nose a few times, the soreness and swelling in the eyes were slightly relieved. Wyatt opened WeChat and read the messages. A bright red number 1 was marked in the upper right corner of the pinned contact's profile picture. You can read the content without clicking in. "Come and take her away. Let her rest assured that I won't bother you." Wyatt's heart felt like being pricked by a tiny needle. He shrank in pain and without thinking, he took out Daisy's number and called her. A mechanical and cold female voice came from the other end. "Hello, the number you dialed is busy." Wyatt checked the time. It was 22:17. Who was she talking to at this late hour? I opened WeChat again and wanted to reply her message. I spent a long time editing but still didn't know what to reply. After all, it was me who proposed to end it. And now Aurora is back. Isn't it natural for everything to return to the way it was? It's annoying. Very annoying. He rakes his hair, digs out Levi's number and calls him. Come out for a drink. I'll wait for you at the usual place. After saying that, he hung up the phone without waiting for Levi to speak. The young master of the Baxter family, who had just taken off his pants and was ready to have a good time, cursed at the black screen of his phone, lowered his head and kissed the girl on the face. My beauty, I have something to do first, let's make an appointment next time. Levi rushed to the bar where they often gathered and found Wyatt, who was almost drunk, in a secluded corner of the room. Levi threw the car keys on the table and sat next to Wyatt. Why didn't you go to the box? It's too quiet. It was so quiet that he could only think about who Daisy was talking to on the phone so late at night. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became, so he just went out. Wyatt looked at the transparent glass in his hand and said, You call Daisy. Brother. I'm calling you, what can I say? Levi was speechless. His brother had already said goodbye to the guy, but he still called him. Isn't this extremely embarrassing? Fight. Wyatt's expression was cold, and he was extremely persistent. Levi surrendered and said, Okay, you are my ancestor, I will beat you, okay? The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. Wyatt didn't give up, so he took out his cell phone and called again. It was the same mechanical tone and the same content. The number you dialed is currently busy. I called 3 times in a row, and all of them were busy on the phone. He looked up blankly at Levi, his voice sounding somewhat helpless and distressing. Why is it like this? Levi coughed lightly, organized his words, and tried to be as tactful as possible. Is there a possibility that you have been blocked? 7. Wyatt's emotions completely collapsed when he saw the red exclamation mark on WeChat. He drank whiskey with a concentration of over 40% alcohol, as if it were water. When he was drunk, he held his cell phone and called baby over and over again to a female voice that only said that the number he dialed was on the line. Levi Baxter held his forehead and called Daisy again, but no one answered. It seemed that she had made up her mind to break up completely. Alas, who can be blamed? He didn't want such a good Daisy, but treated the fisheye as a treasure. He deserves it. After all, he is his brother, and Levi felt sad when he called him again and again. He reached out and pulled him up and helped him walk out. Don't scream, brother. I'll take you to find your baby now. Levi got a taxi and was confused when the driver asked him where he was going. Damn, he forgot that he didn't know Daisy's address. Wyatt was drunk like a pervert, only calling out the words baby, wife, and sister in a switchback manner. He was going to be screwed. In desperation, I could only send him home first. Wyatt's house has a combination lock. The combination is a string of numbers that looks like a date, and it has not been changed for more than 2 years. Levi had trouble opening the door lock. Wyatt's phone couldn't handle his torment and turned off. He couldn't make a call, and the drunkard, who was originally quite well behaved, suddenly exploded and clamored to find the baby. Levi could only coax him while pressing the buttons. Okay, I'll find you, baby. Be good, don't make a fuss. When the second-to-last number was pressed, the door opened from the inside. Levi was a little surprised. Why are you here? He has never liked Aurora, especially when Wyatt went to France to see her 3 years ago. After returning, he was in a bad mood and went racing with someone. He ended up in a car accident and his legs were almost broken. After that, his dislike for Aurora reached its peak. I've been on the phone with Wyatt, worried that something might have happened to him. He's fine, you. Before Levi could utter the following 4 words, you go back. Wyatt, who was being held by Levi, pounced on him like a dog seeing a bone. Baby, I found you. Why didn't you answer my call? I missed you so much. Levi. Brother, you are asking for trouble. 8. Wyatt has been in a wheelchair for more than a year. How could such a proud boy accept that he might become a cripple? So he began to become like a hedgehog, with a temper so bad that even his own mother couldn't take care of him. When Wyatt was feeling self-loathing, Daisy showed up. Daisy can do what others can't stand, and she can also do what others can't do. Repeated massage and rehabilitation every day. For more than 400 days and nights, Daisy has been embracing Wyatt with her tenderness, accompanying Wyatt from standing to walking slowly and then returning to normal. Levi even suspected that Daisy was an angel sent by God to save Wyatt. Isn't it an angel in white? The thorns on Wyatt's body gradually disappeared as he recovered, and he was still the noble and arrogant heir of the Pearson family. After his recovery, Wyatt is more calm and composed than before. It is a natural progression for him to take charge of Pearson. Wyatt's social activities gradually increased. Many people tried to please him by pushing women around him, but Wyatt rejected them all. Others were enjoying themselves, but Wyatt was alone, feeling out of place. Until one time when his friends were having a party, Wyatt got drunk and Daisy came to pick him up. During the 1 year or so that Wyatt was disabled, the only people who could come into contact with him were his family and 3 or 2 close friends. Therefore, not many people had seen Daisy. Although they had never seen Daisy, they were familiar with Aurora and the others. Seeing such a similar face, the group of friends looked at each other and saw 2 words in each other's eyes: substitute. When someone was smart enough to date Wyatt again, he asked for a princess who looked a bit like Aurora. Wyatt's eyes sparkled, but he didn't refuse. From then on, every time Wyatt attended a drinking party, there would be someone accompanying him. Some were tall, some were short, some were fat, some were thin, but the only thing they had in common was that they all looked like the girls who would pick Wyatt up after every drinking party. Wyatt drinks very moderately and rarely gets drunk unless he's angry with Daisy. This is also what Levi himself concluded later. Because every time Wyatt gets drunk, he will hold on to the woman next to him and won't let go, calling her baby, and begging her not to leave him. When Daisy comes to pick him up, he won't let her touch him, calling her baby daughter-in-law even more happily, and won't stop until Daisy coaxes him. But things are different now than in the past. Levi thought, I just left you last time and you still haven't learned your lesson. Besides, can I just call you master this time? He finally figured it out. Damn the stand-in plot. His brother has been trapped in it and doesn't even know it. Pulling the drunk who pounced on Aurora like a pug back and holding him firmly, Levi gnashed his teeth in his ear and said, If you don't want to lose Daisy completely, then be the fucking obedient one. The word Daisy was like a button switch and Wyatt, who was still struggling, immediately became quiet. Levi sighed and carried the person to the master bedroom. As for Aurora, it wasn't his house after all, so he couldn't kick her out. He just let her fend for herself. 9. Daisy was in a very good mood today, so good that even when she saw the circle of friends Aurora sent to Wyatt about making breakfast, she thought it was indeed a delicious dish that could whet her appetite. After checking the call records to confirm that she was not dreaming, Daisy put on some light makeup and went to work happily. As for the missed calls from Levi, I naturally ignored them. The nurse in the department asked her, Dr. Donovan, is there any good news? You seem to be smiling all the time. Daisy's eyebrows curved and even her tone rose slightly with a playful tone. Well, my brother is coming to see me. She received a call from Jonah last night. The young man back then, who was as innocent as a mountain and as pure as water, said to her softly and tenderly through the long network cable, Sister, remember to pick me up at the airport tomorrow. They were so familiar with each other that it seemed as if the blank period of these years had never existed at all. After a moment of stagnation, a huge joy swept over me. Finally. Can I see him? At noon, Daisy asked the director for a week's leave. Jonah said he could only stay for a week at most, and she wanted to spend some time with him. The plane arrived at 3 in the afternoon, and Daisy was waiting at Chengdu International Airport before 2 o'clock. The waiting time was always unusually long. She stared at the second hand on her watch moving slowly, her heart seeming to be in her throat. The air conditioning in the airport hall was turned up high, but Daisy still broke out in a sweat. An auntie who was also there to pick her up handed Daisy a pack of tissues, pointed at her forehead and asked gently, Girl, are you nervous? How could she not be nervous? She still often dreams about the day when Jonah had the accident. If it weren't for her, how could he? At 3:15, as Daisy waited eagerly, Jonah, sitting in a wheelchair, was pushed out by a sturdy man in a suit. He became paler, almost sickly. Oh no, her Jonah was sick. He rolled down the hill to save her, and his legs never stood up again. A few days before that, Jonah had just received a notice to join the national swimming team, and his future was bright. Daisy stood there motionless, as if under a spell without blinking. She was afraid that this was all a dream and she would wake up in the blink of an eye. How many years had passed? 4? Or 5? She couldn't remember. She only remembered that she was kneeling outside the operating room covered in blood, and Chi's mother was beating her like crazy, screaming why it wasn't her. Why it wasn't her who rolled down the hill. Yes, why not her? She also thought that the blood on her clothes was hers and not Jonah's. Such a high mountain with blood all over the ground. Jonah must be in pain. Daisy was still in a daze. Jonah had been pushed to her side. He reached out and tugged at her clothes. He said coquettishly, "Sister, what are you thinking about? I called you but you ignored me." Daisy suddenly came to her senses, blinked, and subconsciously touched his fair and tender cheek. Jonah rubbed her palm like a kitten. Feeling his body temperature, Daisy's floating heart finally felt real. He was really back and she really touched him. Daisy opened her mouth several times but no sound came out. Her throat was very dry. After straining for a long time, she finally managed to squeeze out 2 dry words. "Jonah." It sounded hoarse and harsh like it had been rubbed with sandpaper. Jonah curled his lips, revealing 2 dimples looking very cute. "Hey sister. It's me." 10. Daisy pushed Jonah back to the small apartment she rented. The location of the house she rented is not very good, but the rent is not very low. When she was looking for houses, there were many houses with suitable locations and reasonable prices, but Daisy still chose this one without hesitation. The friend who accompanied her to look at houses asked her why, and she said, "Because it is the only one with an elevator." Justified and as it should be. Later, she was pushing Wyatt in and out, and the friend who came to see her happened to meet her and teased her. "You are quite foresight. What, do you know that someone will need to be taken care of in the future?" Daisy was silent. Someone wanted to take care of her, but Wyatt was not her original intention. As for Wyatt, it was just a coincidence. The sunshine that day was so bright that it made people want to cry. He sat in a wheelchair, as sad as a butterfly with broken wings, and then he called her sister. A frail handsome boy sitting in a wheelchair, looking up and calling her sister, looked so much like her Jonah. Daisy rented a 2-bedroom apartment, and she lived in the 2nd bedroom. The door of the master bedroom had never been opened. Wyatt was curious before, but she just said that she shared the house with a friend, and her friend went abroad some time ago, so he didn't ask any more questions. Today, the master bedroom that had been vacant for many years finally welcomed its owner. Daisy opened the door and pushed him inside. The room was clean and tidy. The bed sheets, quilt covers and curtains were all Jonah's favorite sky blue. There was a large display cabinet at the end of the bed, filled with anime figurines that Jonah liked when he was a child. Daisy swallowed, a little nervous. "Jonah, do you like it?" Jonah blinked, his dimples appearing and disappearing. "I like anything my sister prepares." Still the same as before, very well behaved. Daisy squatted down and pinched the tender flesh on his cheek. She smiled and her eyes were filled with tears. "My Jonah has grown so tall that you can't wear the clothes I prepared for you anymore." Jonah hurriedly wiped her tears and coaxed her softly. "Don't cry, sister. I'll show you a magic trick, okay?" Daisy didn't want to cry, but she couldn't control it. Hearing this, she forced back her tears and nodded seriously. "Then sister, stand back a little, close your eyes and don't peek. Forget it, just stand over there and turn around. You can only turn around when I tell you to." Jonah was still afraid that she would peek, so he pointed to the corner. Daisy naturally obeyed him in everything. She stood up and walked to the corner he designated, leaning her head against the wall, waiting for Jonah to call her. Behind me, there was the sound of a wheelchair sliding gently across the floor. A few minutes later, Jonah's gentle and clean voice was heard. "Okay, sister, you can turn around now." Daisy turned around and saw the young man standing in front of the French window. The golden sunlight shone on him, and the thin layer of sweat on his forehead was shining. He clenched his teeth and tried to force a stiff smile at her. He wanted to say, "Sister, look, I can stand up." 11. The Pearson headquarters was in a state of panic, and everyone was on edge, fearing that they might accidentally catch the eye of the big boss who looked as dark as the king of hell. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the luxurious office, and more than a dozen cigarette butts were piled up in the ashtray on the golden Nanmu desk. Zhang Yang stood straight, waiting for Wyatt to sign the document he had just brought. He glanced at the phone thrown aside. The phone was still on, probably because it had just been left alone. A row of red exclamation marks filled the entire screen. It was conspicuous and glaring. Zhang Yang immediately retracted his gaze, his eyes on his nose on his mouth on his heart. His boss must have been blocked. No wonder he was so irritable today. Wyatt flipped through the neatly bound business plan page by page, and his thumb was scratched by the paper when he was distracted, and a few drops of blood oozed out. He was stunned for a few seconds, and his deep eyes burst into light, and his eyebrows, which had been frowning for a long time, also relaxed. Prepare the car and go to the hospital. Zhang Yang has always believed that as an excellent assistant to the president, it is also one of his jobs to care about the boss's health, so he naturally asked, "Are you feeling unwell?" Wyatt raised his scratched finger. "It's bleeding. It needs to be bandaged." Zhang Yang was speechless as he looked at the wound that was about to heal. It was really hard for his boss to be able to speak seriously. When they arrived at the hospital, Wyatt, who insisted on seeing Dr. Donovan, was told that Dr. Donovan had taken a week off. His handsome face, which had just been clear of clouds, was once again covered with thick dark clouds. Zhang Yang was asked to inquire about the situation, and a knowledgeable nurse told him that a relative had come to see Dr. Donovan. Wyatt finally felt a little relieved. After a little thought, he made an appointment and asked the nurse to wrap his thumb with gauze in 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. An almost invisible wound was turned into a broken bone. Wyatt raised his hands and looked left and right, and was very satisfied. As for the family members who came to see Daisy, he automatically put Daisy's parents in his place. He knew Daisy's family, and there was no one else except her parents who were university professors. Now that the family has just reunited, they should be busy reminiscing about the past. Wyatt decided to go find Daisy in the evening and show her his hands, which were wrapped like dumplings, to make her feel sorry for him. He would also take her parents out for dinner to make a good impression. As for the ending he mentioned before, he had long forgotten it. 12. Wyatt spent the entire afternoon choosing gifts and dressing himself up. Poor Baxter was worried that his brother might be taken advantage of by someone with ulterior motives, so he condescended to serve Wyatt all night. After returning home for lunch and just wanting to catch up on his sleep, he was summoned by Wyatt again. Lying on the leather sofa without any image, he watched Wyatt change clothes one by one like a butterfly, asking how he liked each piece. When Wyatt changed into the 23rd suit, Levi finally couldn't bear it anymore. "No, big brother, what's wrong with you? Go meet the parents." Wyatt pursed his lips, a blush on his cheeks. "Well, Daisy's parents are here." Levi suspected that he was dazzled and rubbed his eyes vigorously. "What the hell? Wyatt is actually shy? I've never seen this before. But did Sister Daisy invite you?" The tall figure fiddling in front of the mirror paused. Levi continued, "Brother, do I need to remind you you are finished, understand? Game over. What the hell is this guy thinking? He dumped the girl and yet he's thinking about meeting her parents?" Wyatt's broad shoulders slumped, and his thin lips were pursed into a line. He rolled his eyes at Levi, walked over and kicked Levi's outstretched leg, signaling him to make room. Levi pulled his legs back and moved his hips. Wyatt sat down next to him, leaning back against the back of the couch and looking up at the white ceiling. "Levi, I don't know what's wrong with me. I've been missing her a lot these past few days. Especially today, I missed her like crazy." He raised his hand to show Levi. "You asked me how I got hurt before. Actually, I just scratched it with paper. I just thought it would hurt her if she saw it. Here," he pointed to the heart again. "It hurts a lot. Now you know how painful it is. I guess you will suffer in the future." Levi didn't have the heart to say it. Patting Wyatt on the shoulder, he advised him earnestly, "Get rid of Aurora as soon as possible. This has nothing to do with Sister Aurora." Wyatt defended subconsciously. "Okay, the identification is complete. What an idiot." Teen. Wyatt rang Daisy's doorbell carrying a lot of gifts, and his mind was still circling over and over again what Levi had said to him. Although he still disagrees that Aurora will affect him and Daisy, Levi's other words are still very pertinent, especially the one about falling in love with Daisy, which is an epiphany. Thinking back on how good Daisy had been to him over the years, Wyatt stared at the door and grinned foolishly. Daisy opened the door and was faced with Wyatt's handsome face with a grin on his face. She frowned and said in a distant tone, "What's the matter?" She was wearing an apron and holding a spatula in her hand. Her long black hair was casually tied behind her head with an elastic band, and a few strands of hair hung down at her temples, adding a little charm to her beautiful and dignified face. Everything was so normal, as if she had returned to the days when she would prepare dinner and wait for him at home. Wyatt's heart was so soft that he wanted to touch her, hug her, and whisper in her ear, telling her that he loved her. What should he do? She would be so shy that she would bury her head in his arms. Even if she loves money, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he has plenty of money and the ability to make money. I will transfer the Riverview Villa in Genuine to her name later. Or buy her a car, but Daisy doesn't seem to be able to drive, then I have to assign her a driver. Sister, who's here? A clear and clean male voice accompanied by the sound of a wheelchair rolling interrupted Wyatt's imagination of the future. The black pupils shrank. During the year when Wyatt was at his lowest point in his life, this voice had always been with him. He was too familiar with this voice. He was much taller than Daisy and could easily see what was going on inside the room just by raising his eyes. The thin and frail boy sitting in a wheelchair called his sister in a gentle voice, just like himself back then. No wonder. No wonder she burst into tears even though it was their first meeting. The tall figure swayed and Wyatt's face turned pale. I think you should give me an explanation. Daisy lowered her eyes, still looking quiet and gentle, and her words were still soft and gentle. It's just what you think, there's nothing to explain. 14. Wyatt didn't know how he left Daisy's small apartment. His heart ached as if it had been torn in half and was bleeding. It turns out that being treated as a substitute by the person you like is so painful. Has she felt this pain before? She was wrong. She didn't like him, so how could it hurt? Haha. Daisy didn't like him. Daisy actually didn't like him. She was so nice to him just because he happened to be a cripple who called him sister. From the beginning to the end, all the kindness she showed him was not for him. Ridiculous, really ridiculous. Wyatt wandered on the street like a zombie, with honking and shouting behind him. He felt like he was dying from the pain. How cruel. Less than an hour after he realized his true feelings, he found out that he was just a substitute. How cruel, how cruel. Levi was really going crazy. He was once again pulled out of bed by the phone call. Only this time it was the police station that called him. Hello. Do you know the owner of this phone? Please come to the Shuanglian Road police station. The owner is not in a good mental state and is suspected of committing suicide. Shit. How come he ended up in the police station when he was fine just now? He even tried to commit suicide? He was so awesome. Levi immediately put on his clothes and rushed to Shuanglian Road. After repeatedly bowing and apologizing to the police officer who received him and receiving some lectures, Levi led the dazed Wyatt out of the police station. As soon as he got in the car, he lit a cigarette irritably. Levi couldn't hold back his anger any longer. Running a red light? Crossing the road? Wyatt, are you fucking crazy? You're not fucking disabled enough, and you want to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair, right? Is it still possible? Levi was about to continue cursing when he was asked, What? If I sit back in the wheelchair and become disabled again, will Daisy come back? Levi was startled by his hoarse voice and looked sideways at him, only to find that he was crying. The man who had never shed a tear when he was trapped in the overturned car and almost died actually cried. Wyatt raised his hands to cover his eyes and choked up. Levi, she doesn't love me. She never loved me from the beginning to the end. Levi took a deep puff of the cigarette, and his chest felt stuffy and uncomfortable. What the hell is going on? Why not just be a playboy like him? Why bother with love? Idiots, all of them are fucking idiots. 15. Daisy watched Wyatt leave and stood at the door in a daze for a while, until Jonah called her. The boy looked up at her, his big black and white eyes full of innocence. Sister, who was that just now? It's a friend of my sister's. She just happened to be passing by today, and came to visit. Daisy answered as she walked towards the kitchen. The bone soup was still cooking on the stove, so it should be about time. Jonah looked at her from behind, poked the tender flesh of her cheek with his tongue, and smiled a wicked smile. The words he said were innocent and sweet. "Oh, so that's it. Friends. Sister, why can't you just wait for me? Do you know how hard I have worked to get back to you?" Daisy made a few light dishes, and Jonah was so sweet that he praised a simple home-cooked meal as a delicacy. Daisy was so amused that she smiled and rubbed his face. "You're still the same as when we were little, always trying to make your sister happy." Jonah pouted. "Sister, I'm 21 years old. We can get married in 1 year." Yes, my Jonah is now a beautiful little man." Jonah was dissatisfied. "Comrade Daisy, I have to criticize you seriously. How can you praise a boy for being pretty? You should praise him for being handsome." Okay, I was wrong. I apologize to Comrade Jonah. Comrade Jonah is the most handsome man in the world. I forgive you." Jonah lowered her eyes, her thick eyelashes trembling. His name sounded so good when she called it out. After dinner, Daisy pushed Jonah downstairs for a walk and went to a nearby supermarket to buy some fruits and snacks. In June, Chengdu felt a little dry like in early summer, but fortunately the wind was still cool at night. The air was filled with the faint scent of gardenias, and students returning home late whizzed past on their bicycles. Daisy's heart was gently tugged again. If it weren't for her, Jonah could have been so free instead of wasting his youth in a wheelchair. Fortunately, Jonah was able to stand up. Although he was exhausted and could only stand for a few seconds, it was good news. At least there was hope, right? As soon as he got home, Jonah twisted his body, lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Sister, I want to take a shower, my body is sticky." Daisy paused. Only now did she realize that Jonah had really grown up and was no longer the little kid who chased after her all day. She scratched her head and blushed. "Why don't you call that gentleman to help you? Jonah is not Wyatt. She can bathe Wyatt and even sleep with Wyatt." That's because, without transferring the irreparable debt to Jonah to Wyatt, she really treats Wyatt as a man. But Jonah can't do that. Jonah is his younger brother. No matter how close he is to the little brat he has watched grow up, he should still pay attention to the difference between boys and girls. 16. Daisy's interpersonal relationships are very simple. So simple that besides her father, the only people she can be considered close to are Wyatt and Jonah. When Daisy was 20 years old and a junior in college, she had a neighboring brother who was 4 years younger than her, and chased her sister around all day, calling her sister. The brother had a nice name, Jonah. Later, Jonah broke his leg while trying to save her. Such a well-behaved and sensible child was ruined just like that. She could understand that Chi's mother resented and hated her. She just wanted to make amends, but the Chi family refused to even give her a chance to make amends. On the third day after Jonah came out of the operating room, he was taken out of the country overnight. Daisy only received a text message from Chi's mother. "Let Jonah go if you still have a conscience. Don't bother him anymore." Daisy really thought how great it would be if Jonah hadn't saved her. It would be better for her to become disabled or even die than to be troubled by the debt and have nightmares every night. The sin of ruining a person's life is really too great, especially when that person is a child whom you love like your own brother. Daisy spent 2 years in a daze, burdened with guilt and indebtedness. Apart from studying, she blocked all social activities. She labeled herself a sinner. Jonah must have had a hard time. As the culprit who harmed him, how could she have the right to enjoy happiness? The year after Jonah left, Daisy, who was assigned to the People's Hospital for internship, met Wyatt, who was in a wheelchair. She gave all the compensation she couldn't give to Wyatt. She knew very well that Wyatt was not Jonah, but what could she do? She couldn't see the boy with dimples when he smiled. Just think of it as a change of peace of mind. Even though she knew very well that she had compensated the wrong person. Sometimes she even wondered if she was sick. But after all, she felt better. Being sick was better than being driven crazy by guilt. "I went to bed with Wyatt in the 3rd month after he recovered." She couldn't say with a clear conscience that she wasn't attracted to Wyatt. After all, he was such a handsome and elegant person. She loved Wyatt, it was true. She was also very clear about her position, so even though it was painful at the end, she managed to get out of it safely. As for losing her virginity, who hasn't paid the price for her youthful impulse? After all, she just wanted to go crazy. She didn't regret it. I think she is just a girl in her 20s. She consciously transfers her guilt towards one person to another person, consciously falls in love with someone who treats her as a substitute, and consciously leaves without hesitation when the other party proposes to end the relationship. Clearly, realized that her younger brother who wanted to take a bath had grown up to the age where he should pay attention to the safe distance between men and women. 17. Jonah returned to his country with a bodyguard who took care of his daily life, but he gave the bodyguard a vacation after he met Daisy. The little guy is mean and mischievous. He says that he wants others to appreciate the beautiful scenery of China, but in fact he is afraid that it will affect his and his beloved sister's world of two. Hearing Daisy's suggestion, he frowned and said in embarrassment, "It seems that he bought a ticket to Spring City directly at the airport. I'll ask him. If he hasn't flown yet, I'll ask him to come over. Don't bother me anymore. I'll think of a solution." Jonah tilted his head, thinking. After a few minutes, his eyes lit up and he snapped his fingers. "Sister, can you ask that friend to come over and help? The dimples are shallow, and the girl is innocent and naive." Daisy bit her lower lip and struggled. She couldn't take the initiative to contact Wyatt and beg him for help, but she owed Jonah too much, and she was unwilling to let him down. After thinking for a long time, she decided to look through her address book to see if there were any other suitable candidates. For the first time, Daisy was angry at herself for not being good at socializing. Most of the people in her address book were girls, and there were a few people of the opposite sex who were colleagues in the hospital. They were either married or just casual acquaintances. After searching for a long time, only Levi was suitable. Wyatt's best friend, and he had some friendship with her. The tool Levi is staring blankly with the frustrated Wyatt. Well, just in a daze. The two of them sat in the bar box staring at each other. Levi raised his arm and checked the time. It had been 3 hours. How amazing! He had done nothing but sit here with an idiot for 3 hours. After Wyatt refused his request for a drink to relax for the 7th time, Daisy called. The loud ringtone broke the silence in the room. The two big words Daisy jumped on the phone screen. Levi finished the call under Wyatt's glare. As soon as he hung up the phone, Wyatt asked him with red eyes, "Why did she call you?" Levi looked innocent. "She asked me for a favor. She said her brother was not very mobile, and asked me to find someone to help her brother take a bath. When did she have a brother? She was not alone." Levi fell silent as he spoke. His brother who had difficulty moving. This must be the source of the problem. Wyatt still insisted. "Why come to you and not me? Isn't your phone on silent? Maybe she couldn't find you." Upon hearing this, Wyatt took out his phone and checked it. There were indeed quite a few missed calls. When he clicked on them, the only 2 calls he saw were Aurora and Jonah. His crow-feather eyelashes trembled and he began to feel aggrieved again. "Fuck. Bro. Can you please stop crying? Really fuck?" Never mind, he had no words to curse. 18. Levi originally wanted to pay someone to help him. After all, with his large family and wealth, it was never his turn to serve others. But the Pearson family's helmsman, who had never done any housework, gritted his teeth and took on the job. Levi had no choice but to accompany him to Daisy's house. He was just worried that if a fight broke out, the situation would be out of control, and he definitely didn't want to watch the fun. The small apartment Daisy rented was not far from the bar, only about 10 minutes' drive away. Daisy was quite surprised to see Wyatt. She thought that due to his pride they would never have any contact with each other again. But why only the 2 of them? She didn't really believe that 2 rich young men could do the job of bathing someone. She stood on tiptoe and looked back, and there was indeed no one. Since they were already here, and it was the person she called, she couldn't just chase them away. Daisy opened the door and let the person in. Wyatt glanced at Jonah, who was looking at him with a smile, and ignored him. He moved slowly towards Daisy and raised his right hand with his thumb still wrapped in layers of silk. With a flat mouth he said pitifully, "I'm injured. It hurts." Daisy sighed slightly. Then Wyatt should go back and rest early. After that, she went around him and went to Levi to talk about giving the child a bath. As for Wyatt, even if his fingers were broken or his limbs were amputated, it wouldn't be her turn to feel sorry for him. Aurora's daily show of different styles had worn away her already restrained love. Jonah had a cute smile on his face the whole time. He smiled as Wyatt ran to Daisy to act like a spoiled child, and smiled as Daisy passed by him to talk to Levi. Finally, he smiled and slowly raised his middle finger to Wyatt, opened his mouth and silently said, "Loser." Daisy naturally had no idea what her flawless, clean and beautiful little angel-like baby brother had done. She was busy discussing with Levi how to give her baby brother a bath. As for Wyatt, it was the first time someone gave him the middle finger, and it was by the person he hated the most at this stage, so he couldn't admit defeat. He curled his lips, raised his right hand and pointed it back viciously, but his thumb was wrapped and could not bend, so the raised thumb and middle finger formed a perfect check sign. 19. Levi felt that Wyatt was a real jerk. He was the one who took the job, but he ended up being the one who got pissed off. How could he help his brother take a bath with his hands that were swollen like a level 10 disabled person? Dog, what a dog. But what can I do? I can't expose him. As a brother, I should cooperate with him in the performance, but I turned a blind eye to his performance. I can only blame myself for being too young and not being able to tell the difference between a human and a dog. Levi raised his head and sighed silently, forcing a big smile, and turned to push Jonah. "Come on, brother, we'll take you to take a shower." Jonah didn't want to, but he didn't show it. Even though things didn't go as he wanted, it didn't matter, we still had a long way to go. After 5 long years in a wheelchair, he had long been accustomed to waiting and endurance. After the two entered the bathroom, Wyatt and Daisy were the only ones left in the living room. Daisy completely ignored Wyatt and went to the balcony to touch the clothes hanging out to dry. The weather was good today, so the clothes were dried after just a few hours. I took out the larger set of couple pajamas and placed it at the bathroom door. Although she would prepare clothes for Jonah every year, they were all purchased according to his size when he left, so of course he couldn't wear them now. Her Jonah had already grown taller and taller in a place she couldn't see. So in the afternoon, Daisy took Jonah shopping for clothes. In addition to couple pajamas, they also bought several sets of couple outfits for everyday wear. Daisy was resistant at first. She had never worn such clothes when she was with Wyatt, not to mention Jonah was his younger brother. But Jonah said that this could also be called parent-child clothing, and that siblings could wear it. The salesperson also said that many siblings and siblings would buy it. During the stalemate, a boy happened to bring his younger sister to buy 2 sets, and Daisy compromised. Wyatt followed to the balcony and looked at the couple's outfits swaying gently in the evening breeze. His mind went blank. He staggered and held on to the wall beside him to support himself. As expected. It's not just my brother, right? After a brief moment of daze, Wyatt was overcome by anger. He rushed to Daisy, clamped her arms with both hands, his eyes red. Why do this to me? Daisy was confused and frowned as she pushed him away. What the hell are you doing? Let me go. It hurts. Wyatt didn't have time to care about anything else. He was like an angry lion and wanted to tear Daisy apart and eat her. I'm just his replacement, right? Daisy, tell me the fuck. Am I just a replacement? Daisy watched him go crazy quietly, without saying a word. After a few minutes, Wyatt regained some of his sanity after not getting a response. He released the force in his hands and pulled Daisy into his arms. Sister, please don't be so cruel, please. Burying his head in Daisy's neck and smelling her hair, Wyatt cried like a baby. He whispered over and over again. Don't do this to me, please, please. How could he feel that he didn't love her? His heart was clearly in pain. What should he do? What should he do? Daisy felt a little pain in her heart when she heard Wyatt sobbing, but she still pushed him away firmly after thinking about the past. That's fair, isn't it? She lowered her head and didn't look at Wyatt. Her words came out slowly but clearly. We don't want to see each other again. 20. Wyatt had already left when Levi pushed Jonah out. Levi couldn't stay any longer, so he said a few words to Daisy and left too. Daisy glanced at Jonah, who had just finished taking a shower and was dazed for a moment. The boy's hair was wet and folded on his forehead, and he looked very well behaved. Perhaps it was the heat that caused a little blush on his pale cheeks, making him as beautiful as a finely carved porcelain doll. This child is getting more and more handsome as he grows older. A gleam of brilliance flashed across Jonah's sparkling peach eyes, and his slender white hand silently brushed across the collar, which was lifted up, revealing one delicate collarbone. He bit his lips slightly and called out softly, Sister. Daisy came back to her senses immediately, her face flushed red, and she said, I'll go get the hairdryer. She quickly ran into the bathroom and washed her face with cold water to get rid of the dryness. Daisy looked at herself in the mirror and felt a little annoyed. What did she do just now? She was actually obsessed with Jonah's face. It's only been a short time since she and Wyatt separated. She shouldn't be that hungry. Daisy scooped up some cold water to wash her face, then took the hairdryer to blow the child's hair. Jonah has short hair and blow dries it quickly. Sister, go take a shower. After you're done, I'll blow dry your hair. Okay. Jonah said softly and coquettishly. Oh, by the way, you have to wear the same pajamas as me. There was no reason for Daisy not to obey him. Her heart melted. She raised her hand and rubbed Jonah's soft hair that had just been blown dry. She thought to herself, my brother is so cute, just like a kitten. 21. Daisy came out of the shower and Jonah was waiting for her with a glass of milk. Sister, here you go. It will help you sleep. Daisy didn't doubt it. She said thank you, took it, tilted her head back and drank it all up. After finishing it, she licked her lips with the tip of her tongue out of habit. Jonah's eyes were deep, and his hands on his sides were clenched into fists. Then he lowered his head and hooked his lips in a wicked way. Sister, you seduced me, so you can't blame me. After drinking the milk, Daisy put the cup on the table, took a small stool and sat obediently in front of Jonah to let him blow dry her hair. Jonah blew her air while massaging her gently, his fingers pressing her scalp and moving through her hair. Daisy yawned, feeling so comfortable that she felt a little sleepy. After blow-drying his hair, Jonah asked Daisy to tell him a bedtime story. She had no choice but to push Jonah back to the master bedroom despite her sleepiness. Since Jonah could stand for a short time now and she had experience in taking care of people, it was not difficult to get him to bed. After covering him with the quilt, Daisy sat by the bed, patting him gently and telling him a story. Before the accident, the Chi family and the Jung family lived next door to each other, and Jonah had been attached to Daisy since he was a child. Daisy had done a lot of things to coax him to sleep when he was a child, and now she was quite good at it. As she spoke, her vision became increasingly blurry. Daisy nodded a few times before falling asleep. Jonah sat up, poked her soft cheek with his fingertips and called her, Sister. No response. Jonah opened the quilt, moved his stiff legs out of bed, and then, enduring the severe pain, he walked around the end of the bed step by step, and carried Daisy's legs under the bed to the bed. After doing all this, his body was already soaked with cold sweat. He could leave, otherwise his mother would never let him go back to Daisy, but he didn't tell Daisy. He wasn't afraid that Daisy would wake up and find out. He added something to the glass of milk that Daisy drank. It was something his father spent a huge amount of money to buy for him when he couldn't sleep due to the pain in the early stages of paralysis. Of course, it didn't hurt the body, and he couldn't bear to hurt his baby. After resting for a while, when the pain subsided, Jonah gritted his teeth and crawled back to the bed, lying next to Daisy. It took him more than 20 minutes to walk back and forth. Jonah tapped his legs. It was really useless. How long would it take to pick up his sister if he continued like this? After resting for a while, he propped himself up and lay on his side, tracing Daisy's eyebrows and eyes with his fingers. His tender peach blossom eyes were filled with deep affection that could not be hidden. Sister, I thought about letting you go. He was the one who didn't know how to cherish you, so you can't blame me for taking you back. From now on, I will take care of you and love you, okay? After saying that, he lowered his head and held Daisy's lips. After kissing for a few times, he bit her lower lip lightly as if to vent his anger. Daisy waved her hands in her sleep, pouting her red lips as if to express her dissatisfaction. Jonah let out a few low laughs from his throat, pecked her where she was bitten and said lovingly, You're so delicate. 22. The next day when Daisy opened her eyes, she saw a magnified handsome face smiling at her. Even though she was a medical student, she was still shocked. Jonah smiled broadly at her. Good morning, sister. Daisy recovered and poked his dimple. Did I fall asleep last night? Well, my sister was telling me a story and she fell asleep. It took me a lot of effort to carry you up here. Jonah's eyes curved into little crescents. It felt so good to see her as soon as he woke up, especially since they were wearing couple pajamas, feeling like a pair of lovers sleeping in the same bed. The drugging trick can only be used once. If you use it too many times, your sister will definitely become suspicious, which is a bit annoying. Daisy got up and washed up before she ran into another problem. Jonah had to go to the bathroom. Although doctors don't differentiate between men and women, but she's not wearing that white coat now, and Jonah is different from her patients. She gritted her teeth, suppressed her shyness, and took Jonah to the bathroom. I must hire a temporary caregiver today. Jonah looked at Daisy, who had her eyes closed and her face blushing, and he really wanted to rub her. How could she be so cute? After meeting the physiological needs, you still have to change the child's clothes. Daisy was feeling embarrassed at first, but then she changed her mind and realized that she owed the other person the money, and now the person in question was sitting right in front of her, giving her the opportunity to make it up to him, so there was no need to be pretentious. She has come to terms with it. It's the other child's turn to quit. He held his pants tightly and looked at her pitifully. Sister, men and women should not touch each other. If you see me naked, I will be responsible. Daisy was happy and tapped his forehead. Don't give me that, I'm your sister. She's not my biological sister. Jonah muttered, but let go of his hand obediently. Jonah looks thin, but he actually has muscles when he takes off his shirt. Daisy poked his belly and said, Not bad, young man. You even have abdominal muscles. Jonah blushed and said, It's just my legs that are bad. I'm not completely paralyzed. Daisy ignored him and continued to pull down his pants. A few seconds later, a shout erupted in the room. Jonah! Ahem. A normal reaction. You can interpret it as, that's fine too. Are you kidding? It would be abnormal if he didn't react after being done that by the woman he loves and then poked her belly with her little hand. 23. Daisy hired a nurse from the hospital, who only needed to help Jonah take a bath at night and help him change his clothes in the morning. Jonah groaned for a long time, but seeing that Daisy had made up her mind, he could only obey with a pout. But he was not one to sit there and wait for death. He asked Daisy to sleep with him at night, saying that he would be there in case he needed anything and he was unable to move. Daisy thought about it and took it seriously. That night, she moved a small bed for the patient to the master bedroom. Jonah ignored her all night, gnashing his teeth. It was 3 days later that I received a call from Levi. Thinking that she had just troubled others a few days ago, Daisy didn't feel comfortable pretending not to hear it this time. Levi's environment was a bit noisy. His voice was cut into segments by heavy metal. Sister Daisy, can you come over to Mengsheng? Wyatt is drunk. Mengsheng is the bar they often go to. Daisy has no idea how many times she has gone there to pick up Wyatt. Daisy paused but still refused. I'm sorry, Mr. Baxter, Wyatt and I are done, and it's not appropriate to pick him up. You should find someone else. Sister Daisy, can't you give him another chance? He really likes you. Do you like it? Daisy actually wanted to laugh when she heard these 2 words. Mr. Baxter, there is something I have never told you. Julie, I am 1 year younger than Wyatt. So, who was Wyatt calling his sister for the past 3 years? She thought they all knew it. I'm sorry, Mr. Baxter, I really can't help you with this. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now. After saying that, he hung up the phone without hesitation. Levi held the phone in his hand, listening to the beeping sound, and glared angrily at his friend who was living a life of drunkenness and dreaming. I cursed in my heart. You're just being silly. I'll let you do that. Idiot. Wyatt didn't act up this time. He sat in the corner with a bottle of wine in his arms, drunkenly waiting for Daisy to pick him up, as obedient as a primary school kid. This time he didn't need Daisy to coax him. As long as she came to pick him up, he would go home with her obediently. But he had waited for so long, why didn't she come? Levi used his fingers as a comb to rake his messy hair in annoyance, and took out a few pieces of paper from the tissue box on the table and wiped Wyatt's face roughly. While wiping, he cursed, Fuck. You belong to the faucet class. Aren't you ashamed? You need to know your identity, you are a boss. A boss. Fuck. Forget it. You are my dad. Throwing the paper into the trash can beside the table, Levi sat down next to Wyatt, his arms stretched out on the back of the sofa. He looked up at the rotating crystal chandelier, speechless. What a sin. Who the hell can come to pity the innocent him? He hasn't eaten meat for almost a week. His ying, his yen, his delicate and soft little beauty. Fuck. He wanted to cry too. Levi missed the gentle and warm land of his lover, and it didn't matter that he drank too much. Mengxing was opened by a buddy in their circle. Levi thought that even if they got drunk, there would be people to take care of them, so nothing should go wrong. A lot of facts have proved that should is a magical word. 24. Mengxing's boss is called Ashton, and he usually gets along well with them. He knows a little about Wyatt and Aurora's past. Moreover, Aurora was active and became familiar with Wyatt's friends after going out with him a few times after returning to China. Unlike the stand-in, who was very cold and aloof, he ignored them every time he came to pick up Wyatt. As a rich second generation, Ashton is used to compliments and fawning from others, so he doesn't have much affection for the cold and indifferent Daisy. But it doesn't matter whether he likes her or not, after all, she is not his woman. The most important thing for him now is how to deal with these two drunkards. He booked 2 rooms upstairs and originally wanted to ask the waiter to help them upstairs, but the 2 people refused to cooperate. Levi looked at his arm and then his leg, his mouth flattened, and he yelled for him to compensate for his legs. He said he was a spider spirit and had torn off several of his legs when they were pulling just now. Wyatt was fine. He held the sofa handle tightly and said he was waiting for his baby to pick him up. Ashton was overwhelmed and finally understood the pain and despair of making the wrong friends that Levi had often said these days. The waiter didn't dare to use brute force on these 2 precious ancestors. He could only stand aside and watch Ashton wait for him to make a decision. One side was shouting "compensate for my leg," and the other side was shouting "baby, come here quickly," one after another. Ashton rubbed his temple, took out his phone and called Aurora. Wyatt never formally introduced Daisy to them, so in this small circle, everyone tacitly believed that Daisy was just Aurora's stand-in. Now that the real person is back, the stand-in will naturally give way. When Aurora arrived, Levi had already been sent to the guest room upstairs to rest. Only Wyatt, who was hugging the sofa, and Ashton, who looked helpless, were left in the room. Ashton was so excited when he saw Aurora. "Sister-in-law, you're here. Please get my brother Wyatt away. He's causing me so much trouble." Before Aurora could say anything, Wyatt, with sparkling eyes, pounced on her like a koala. However, the next second Aurora was pushed and staggered. "You are not my baby. Go away, I want to wait for my baby." Wyatt's face darkened and after mumbling, he staggered back to his original position and held on to the sofa tightly. Aurora pulled the corner of her mouth awkwardly at Ashton and forced a dry laugh. "Wyatt drank too much. I'm sorry to have embarrassed you." Ashton waved his hands, not surprised. "Wyatt is drunk and this happens. Before." He wanted to say that Daisy had been like this before when she came to pick him up, or even worse, but at least he wasn't hugging someone else and calling her baby. But he kept silent when he thought it was not good to talk about the substitute in front of the real owner. Aurora tried to pull him, but he waved her away. After several attempts, a thin layer of sweat appeared on her pretty little face. Ashton had no choice but to imitate Daisy's previous coaxing. He squatted in front of him and asked softly, "Go home with your baby and let her make you some sour plum soup. Okay?" Daisy always does this, squatting in front of Wyatt and coaxing him softly. "Wyatt, be good, we're going home. I'll make you some sour plum soup when we get home." Hearing the sour plum soup, Wyatt nodded obediently, glanced around the room and asked blankly, "Where's she?" "Who?" "My wife, where is my wife?" Ashton finally came to his senses. To confirm if he looked more like her, he asked, "Who is your baby?" Wyatt smiled with narrowed eyes, as arrogant and proud as a child showing off his beloved baby to his friends. "Daisy, my wife is Daisy." The word Daisy kept lingering in his throat, feeling extremely tender. 25. Aurora clenched her hands into fists, her long nails pinching the tender flesh of her palms, and 2 of her carefully maintained nails were broken. The red nail polish was mottled at the break, like her torn heart bloody. Turns out that no one will wait there forever. The year she met Wyatt, he was standing on a high podium speaking as a representative of the freshmen. He was thin and small but very handsome. From time to time I would hear news about Wyatt saying that he was good at studying, had a good family background and was good-looking, but his personality was a little arrogant. This person is really a sensory animal. If he is good-looking, he is arrogant, and if he is ugly, he is aloof. Fortunately, Wyatt is not just good-looking. Aurora would just listen and forget about it. At most, She would pretend to be interested when the girls around her were talking about him, saying things like, "Oh, really? That's great. She has been a beauty since she was young, so there are many people willing to praise her. She has a spoiled arrogance towards boys." At that time in her eyes, Wyatt was just a junior who was better than others in everything. Until a few months later. Aurora remembers it very clearly. It snowed very heavily that day. It was the heaviest snowfall in Chengdu in recent decades. The school even dismissed students early because of this. After saying goodbye to her classmates who were left behind to clean the school at the school gate, she took a small path that was usually sparsely populated in order to go home early. Then she saw a thin and small figure being blocked in the center by several boys, all of whom were wearing the same school uniform as her. School bullying? At that time, she didn't know where she got the courage from. She hid herself in a corner and shouted loudly, "Teacher, I hear someone talking over there. Let's go look over there." After a while, as she expected, the group of boys were scared away for fear of being discovered. Aurora came out only after the chaotic footsteps completely disappeared. In the empty alley, there was only a thin and short boy left. He thanked her in a soft childish voice. "Thank you, my name is Wyatt." Aurora just nodded to him, hummed and went home. She was only 14 years old, and she was still a little scared of her own actions. She was afraid of being retaliated against, so she didn't want to reveal who she was, even to Wyatt, whom she rescued. The Pearson family was very powerful, and the boys who surrounded Wyatt soon transferred to other schools. It was said that Wyatt forgot to tell his family about letting school go early, which caused the driver to arrive late, giving those students who were just there to have fun the opportunity to blackmail him. Wyatt finally found her and stood at the door of their class, smiling shyly at her. Since then, Aurora has had a little tail behind her. I took the entrance exam to her high school and went to the same university as her. During college, Wyatt's feelings for Aurora were basically known to everyone. Aurora has also thoroughly demonstrated what it means to be fearless. After graduation, she chose to study abroad. She thought that since Wyatt liked her so much, he would definitely wait for her to come back. 26. Aurora ultimately failed to take Wyatt away. She stood aside in humiliation and watched Ashton call Daisy, her eyes lowered with hatred. The person who had been following her and silently liked her for more than 10 years fell in love with a substitute, and today he made her suffer such humiliation. She couldn't just laugh it off. Ashton's call was quickly disconnected. He turned around and shook his head at Aurora, whose expression had returned to normal. "You refused to come and blocked me." Aurora frowned and said worriedly, "What should we do now?" Ashton shrugged. "Let's wait until he falls asleep and then find someone to carry him upstairs." "Sister-in-law, why don't you go back first?" He was halfway through calling her sister-in-law when he recalled Wyatt's reaction just now and swallowed the rest back. "I'll go to the pharmacy and buy him some hangover medicine so he won't have a headache tomorrow. Give me a door card and I'll deliver it directly to his room." Ashton was a little hesitant, mainly because he really couldn't tell what Wyatt was thinking. Wasn't it said before that he kicked Daisy out for Aurora? Then why was he so desperate today? Aurora raised her arm and stroked her long black hair. There was a little shyness on her pretty face. "Ashton, Wyatt and I have been together for so many years. You don't think there is nothing between us, do you?" As a man, Ashton understood immediately and obediently took out the room card for Wyatt's room and gave it to Aurora. Aurora went to a nearby store and bought 2 boxes of hangover medicine and a few disposable medical straws. She also visited some restaurants nearby and bought a small bag of pigeon blood. Finally, she found a bench on the side of the road and sat there for a long time watching the cars passing by. When she felt that it was about time, she took the medicine and the small bag of pigeon blood and went directly to the room. Ashton must have given him a few more glasses of wine. Wyatt was lying on the bed, completely drunk and unconscious. He had even changed into the white bathrobe commonly seen in hotels. After putting the medicine on the bedside table, Aurora took out a straw, sucked some pigeon blood and dripped a few drops onto the bed. Then she poured the remaining blood into the toilet, wrapped the plastic bag and straw tightly together, and threw them into the toilet and flushed them away. After doing all this, she walked back to the bed and began to undress, then slowly lay down next to Wyatt. Of course, after lying down, she did not forget to take a photo and post it on her Moments, which was visible only to Daisy. 27. Wyatt opened his eyes and saw a thin arm hanging on his body. The pain from the hangover made him dazed for a moment. He cried softly, "Baby, I have a headache." After he finished speaking, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He turned around and saw Aurora rubbing her eyes in confusion. "Aurora, sister, why are you here?" Aurora had been pretending to be asleep, waiting for Wyatt to wake up. She bit her lip and quickly pulled the quilt over her head. The quilt moved, revealing a few drops of bright red blood. Everything is so natural and self-evident. Wyatt rubbed his temple, his dark eyes filled with sarcasm. He tightened the straps of his robe and asked in a deep voice, "Aurora, do you think I'm stupid?" Aurora's body trembled under the quilt, and she couldn't figure out why he would say such a thing. After thinking for a while, she chose a safer excuse. "Wyatt, I don't need you to be responsible, don't worry." Instead of taking responsibility, I think I should tell you why I had a car accident 3 years ago," Wyatt sneered. "It was because I went to France. I wanted to give you a surprise, but do I need to continue, sister?" He called out the last word, sister, very slowly, and his mind couldn't help but think of the girl who always indulged him gently. He wondered what she was doing now. There is a bitter taste in the throat. Wyatt took his clothes to the bathroom, changed, and walked out of the room without even looking at Aurora. After that day, Meng Sheng Wyatt never went there again. 2 days later, some friends got together. Wyatt glanced at the girl next to him who looked a bit like Aurora, but said nothing. But this time he only had a brief taste and didn't drink too much, so naturally he wouldn't do anything out of the ordinary. The atmosphere was so lively that someone nearby joked, "Why did Wyatt drink so little today?" Someone immediately laughed and said, "Now that the real boss is back, who needs a stand-in, right? We probably won't see Wyatt hugging girls and calling them babe anymore in the future." Wyatt frowned and asked in a somewhat cold tone, "What do you mean?" He didn't drink too much simply because that person would never come to pick him up again, and he patiently coaxed him home, but after hearing what they said, it seemed like he had misunderstood something. The person next to him was obviously a little drunk and didn't notice the change in his tone. He said with a thick tongue, "Didn't you kick Daisy out because Aurora came back?" "Brother Wyatt, I'm telling you." With a bang, the wine glass shattered, stopping him from saying anything else. Wyatt's dark eyes were filled with gloom, and blood was dripping from the hand holding the wine glass. "Who told you that, or do you all think so?" He glanced around and saw that everyone in the box lowered their heads and was silent. Only Levi was swinging his legs and walking back and forth with his phone in his hand. He looked like he was just watching the fun. He didn't deny that he started keeping Daisy around because of her face that was similar to Aurora's. He had liked Aurora for 10 years, a whole long time in his youth. Even though he saw her with 2 men later, he couldn't blame her because Aurora never responded to him directly. So this time when she came back to China and asked him to pick her up, he didn't refuse. She said she wanted to get together, and he thought that they knew each other before, so he let her go. They had been friends for more than 10 years, so they wouldn't stop communicating until they died. No wonder Levi asked him to deal with Aurora early. Seeing their expressions, Wyatt's face became more and more ugly. He stood up, grabbed Levi's phone and called Daisy. Time passed by minute, and when the ringing was about to stop, the call was connected. "Hello, Mr. Baxter." Daisy's voice is still gentle and seems to be able to soothe people's hearts. Wyatt turned around and walked quickly to the door. He couldn't cry with so many people watching him. It would be so embarrassing. But no matter how hard he tried, his voice was still choked up. "Baby, listen to my explanation. I wasn't like that because of Aurora that day. I was just a little angry. Angry that you didn't coax me the night before and didn't take me home." However, Daisy did not give him a chance to continue. Her voice was so light that no emotion could be heard. "It doesn't matter, Wyatt. None of this matters anymore." Small theater. It was autumn. Daisy was really annoyed by Wyatt's nagging and decided to talk to him. The two met in the small park of the hospital. Daisy sat on the bench, pulled her coat closer over her white coat, and looked up at the dead leaves swirling down from the trees. "Wyatt, it's getting cold." Wyatt was slightly startled and glanced at Daisy's expression and said cautiously, "Should Pearson go bankrupt?" Daisy: "No, I mean you see so many leaves but no two are exactly the same." If you miss it, you miss it. Wyatt. I'm going to try to bankrupt Pearson. 28. Jonah's eyes have basically never left Daisy these past few days, and he is definitely keeping a close eye on her. Daisy felt embarrassed at first when he looked at her and blocked his eyes with her hands. The child grabbed her hand and pulled it down, rubbing it in his hand, saying in a desolate voice, I haven't seen my sister for so many years, and I'm not allowed to look at her more often. It shows that my sister hasn't thought about me at all in these years. Besides, I can only see her for a week. The words were so sad and mournful that Daisy felt like she was no longer a human being. It's not like she didn't know that he had been clingy since he was young. When she was in high school, she would cling to him even if she didn't see him for half a month, let alone now that it's been so many years. Besides, the child has done this for her, how could she bear it? Just watch it, it won't cost you a thing anyway. Jonah told her that he could only stay in the country for a week, and would have to go back for a follow-up checkup after a week. But what he didn't say was that if the re-examination results were good, he could settle down in China in the future. In the later stage, he only needed to do rehabilitation by himself and go to any hospital in China for re-examination. As long as the rehabilitation is done well, he can walk normally in the future. But it is impossible to recover like a healthy person. Even if he recovers well, he can't do too strenuous exercise such as running fast, jumping, etc. Children are easily content. He can get out of the wheelchair, can go shopping holding Daisy's hand, and can personally hold her in her wedding dress as she walks to the wedding car when she gets married. Thinking of these, even the air is sweet. Daisy was wearing an apron and frying eggs for Jonah. The straps on the back of the apron were a little tight, making her waist look slim. Jonah leaned his arm on the wheelchair armrest, his head in his hand, and watched the movie intently. As he watched, he felt something was wrong. He looked down at his groin, then pushed his wheelchair back to the bedroom and got a blanket. Daisy turned around when she heard the sound and saw the child, wearing a short-sleeved shirt on the upper body and a thick blanket on the lower body, pushing a wheelchair out of the master bedroom, with thin beads of sweat on his forehead. Daisy was confused and asked, Jonah, what are you doing? You're covering yourself with such a thick blanket in such hot weather. Jonah's cheeks flushed and he answered guiltily, I'm cold. Daisy hurried over to touch his forehead. Don't tell me you have a cold. Why are you sweating so much? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere else? No, maybe I caught a cold last night. Jonah had a hard time speaking out his pain, but did he dare to say where he felt uncomfortable? No, he didn't. After confirming that the child did not have a fever, Daisy made a bowl of ginger soup for Jonah. Jonah held the bowl, frowned, and sipped it bit by bit, his face full of bitterness and hatred. He wouldn't eat anything with a hint of ginger before. Now asking him to finish a big bowl of ginger soup is really putting his mother in a difficult position. It's really putting his mother in a difficult position to open the door. Daisy also knew that he didn't like the taste of ginger, but there was no harm in that. Seeing his wrinkled face, Daisy thought it was cute. She reached out and pinched his cheek, saying with a smile, You will feel uncomfortable for a longer time, why not drink it all in one go? Jonah blinked. After drinking, sister pushed me to go shopping? 29. At Jonah's request, the two of them went out today wearing that pink couple outfit. Jonah wore a pink short-sleeved t-shirt with beige cropped pants. The difference between Daisy and him was that her cropped pants had suspenders, a fresh pink and white combination, a pair of overalls, a pair of white shoes, and a high ponytail. She looks as childish as a high school student. Pushing Jonah along the commercial street, their outstanding looks and the rolling wheelchair attracted the attention of many passers-by. There is no shortage of people handing out flyers and small advertisements in the commercial streets. When the two were discussing what they needed to buy, they were blocked by a girl with a photography studio logo printed on her clothes. The little girl blushed and seemed a little shy. She handed Jonah a colorful card. Hi, our studio is having an event. We are offering a 50% discount on couple photo shoots. You too can consider it. We are not. Daisy tried to explain. Next second. Okay, thank you. My girlfriend and I will think about it. The girl happily bowed to the two men, said thank you, and ran off to look for her next potential customer. Daisy frowned and said disapprovingly, Jonah, how could you lie to me? You should tell others clearly that we are siblings. But that's too much trouble. I have to explain. Look, sister, if we follow their point of view, it will be solved quickly. Daisy thought about it for a moment, but didn't pursue the issue any further. 30. Although it was a little chilly at night in June, the daytime temperature was not low. Daisy broke out in a thin layer of sweat after walking for a while. There was nothing to buy, so Daisy simply pushed Jonah to the mall. The mall billboards are covered with posters displaying various jewelry. A jade pendant in the shape of a broken-winged butterfly caught Daisy's attention, and she couldn't help but stop and take a closer look. Jonah turned around and looked at her. Sister, what's wrong? Daisy came back to her senses. Oh, it's okay. It's sunny outside. I was thinking about buying you a hat. Jonah nodded, showing his dimples, and said softly, I will listen to my sister. So good. Daisy pushed Jonah up to the 3rd floor. After choosing for a long time, he finally bought a beige baseball cap that matched the color of his clothes today. The boy's fair and small face was half hidden by the brim of his hat, making him look more energetic. After wandering around for a while and buying some unnecessary small things, it was getting late, so they prepared to go home. When they got downstairs, Jonah touched his earlobe before leaving and said anxiously, I lost my earring. His earrings were custom-made, with the initials of JD. Daisy asked him what it meant when they first met, and he said it meant strength. He also said that he had his ears pierced and custom-made these earrings not long after he went abroad, and if it weren't for them, he probably wouldn't have been able to hold on these past few years. Daisy paused, a little anxious. Think about where it fell. It seems to be on the 3rd floor. Sister, can you leave me downstairs and go upstairs to look for it yourself? It will be faster this way. Daisy quickly agreed. Pushing Jonah to a corner where she wouldn't get in the way of others, she turned and walked towards the elevator. She left in such a hurry that she didn't see the sly light in Jonah's eyes. 31. The earrings are very small and difficult to find. 10 minutes later, Daisy, who was bending over and searching everywhere, received a call from Jonah. Sister, I found the earring. It fell on me and was covered by my clothes. Please come back soon. Daisy stood up straight, wiped the sweat off her forehead with her arm and said okay softly. Jonah was still waiting for her in that corner. When he saw Daisy coming down, he looked guilty and whispered, I'm sorry, sister. It's all my fault. I made you look for so much in vain. Daisy smiled and ruffled his hair, saying lovingly, Glad you found it. Silly boy, why are you so polite to your sister? Jonah looked up, his dimples flickering. Then I won't be polite. Sister, let's go home. Okay, let's go home. After arriving home, Daisy pushed Jonah into the living room and turned on the air conditioner. The sun was scorching at noon, and her face was red from the sun. After turning on the air conditioner, she prepared to wash her hands and make lunch. Daisy had been cooking for herself these past few days. She was a pretty good cook, and in 3 or 4 days Jonah had become a little plumper and looked much healthier. Before she could even reach the kitchen, Jonah called her from behind. Sister, come here for a moment. I have a gift for you. Daisy turned around and walked to the wheelchair, bent her legs and squatted down, looked him straight in the eye and asked with a smile, What's the gift? Close your eyes first. The child asked mysteriously. Daisy cooperated and closed her eyes. After a moment, Jonah's voice sounded again. Okay, you can open your eyes now. Daisy opened her eyes. What she saw was an exquisitely crafted jade pendant. A butterfly with broken wings was lifelike. Daisy was surprised. Isn't this the one she fell in love with at first sight on the poster in the mall? He was so thoughtful. A feeling of being touched came over her. The emerald green butterfly is transparent and flawless, with a fine and even texture and plenty of water. It looks expensive at first glance. This is not cheap. Jonah, I'm very touched, but I can't accept it. Be obedient and let's go back later, okay? Jonah rarely straightened his expression and spoke with great seriousness. Daisy, I can afford to support you. For the first time, he called out in front of her the 2 words that had been lingering on his lips in the past few years when no one was around. Daisy. 32. Jonah used to be a sports student and had just been selected for the national team when his leg became disabled. There was no way he could become an athlete, but if he were asked to attend classes like a normal student, his grades would not be good enough. If you want to achieve something, you have to find another way. Little boys are generally very interested in computers and games. Jonah's father discussed it with him and found a teacher to teach him programming. Jonah's greatest strength is that once he sets his mind on something, he will stick to it no matter how hard it is and try his best to do his best. His selection by the national team shows his tenacity. A few years ago, he designed a few small games for fun, and the market response to 2 of them was surprisingly good. Later, his friend approached him to start a gaming company together. He was in charge of technology, while his friend was in charge of funding and operations. He also became a rising star in the IT industry. Daisy reached out and pinched his face, scolding him with a smile. "You little brat, you have no respect for your elders, and you dare to call me by my name. You have grown up." Jonah pulled her hand down, then inserted his fingers into hers one by one, interlocking theirs. "Daisy, I'm grown up now. Treat me like a man from now on, okay?" He spoke very seriously, his eyes were full of aggression. Daisy blushed and she pulled her hand away with force and said hastily, "Gift? Gift I'll keep it for you first, I'm going to cook." She spoke in a halting and fragmented manner. After that, she stood up and ran to the kitchen. Because he had been squatting, he suddenly stood up and ran. His steps were unsteady and he almost fell. Jonah's voice behind him was filled with doting helplessness. "Be careful, run slowly." Daisy ignored him and ran to the kitchen, closed the door, leaned her back against the door, covered her chest and gasped. His gaze just now was too naked, and all the hidden emotions were released and burst out. Daisy felt panicked for a moment. Is this still the Jonah she knew? When did the puppy grow into a wolf cub? 33. The only relationship Daisy had had until she was 25 was with Wyatt. Oh no, that couldn't even be called a relationship. It's not that she hasn't been pursued before, but no one has been so passionate and straightforward. She doesn't know how to respond, especially when the other party is a child she owes too much. Daisy was in a dilemma. One voice said, "Jonah is the younger brother." Another voice immediately retorted, "Younger brother?" Daisy had been avoiding Jonah the whole afternoon. The brother she had watched grow up with suddenly asked her to treat him like a man, with undisguised love in his eyes. This shock was too great for her to adjust to. Jonah didn't force her, he gave her time to digest it. In the evening, Chengdu, which was sunny in the afternoon, suddenly started to rain. Daisy lay on the small bed with her eyes closed and dozed off. Suddenly, a low, suppressed groan came from the darkness. Daisy initially thought he was doing some do-it-yourself exercise, and her face turned red with shame. She dared not move and even her breathing slowed down. After listening for a while, she realized that something was wrong. There was no joy in the voice. As a doctor, she immediately understood what was going on. He quickly got up, put on his slippers and ran to turn on the light. On the big sky blue bed, the young man who had aggressively told her to treat him as a man during the day was now hunched over in pain. Beads of sweat the size of beans were sliding down his temples. His handsome face was completely bloodless, as pale as paper. "Jonah, does your leg hurt?" Daisy asked quickly. This was the first time she faced Jonah's pain. Tears fell unconsciously and her heart was in great pain. Jonah looked up, trying to force a smile, and coaxed her in a hoarse voice. "Be good, don't cry. It's better to feel pain than to have no feeling, right? This is a good thing. Don't cry, sister, don't cry, I feel sad," he said again. It would have been fine if he hadn't said it, but once he did, Daisy couldn't control herself and burst into tears. It's all her fault. If it hadn't been for saving her, he would have been wearing the national flag, hanging a gold medal around his neck, standing on a high podium, listening to the national anthem and watching the 5-star red flag rise slowly. Jonah wanted to wipe her tears, but he had to give up because of his inability to move. Fortunately, Daisy was not a naive person who only knew how to cry. On the contrary, she rarely cried. Most of the time, she was calm and restrained. Wiping away her tears hastily, Daisy walked forward, lifted the thin blanket on his legs, and pressed gently with her small hands. "I'll give you a massage, it will help relieve the pain." 34. Daisy didn't see the photo Aurora posted on her moments until the next day. At that time, she was sitting in a taxi on the way to the airport, going with Jonah to pick up his bodyguard who was returning from his trip. On the big white bed in the hotel, Aurora half exposed her breasts and smiled seductively at the camera, like a blooming mandala. Behind her was Wyatt, who was sleeping soundly in a bathrobe. Jonah came over at some point and asked jokingly, "What are you looking at, sister?" Daisy quickly put her hand out to block his eyes, and with her other hand she swiped the screen of her phone, found Aurora's friends and deleted her. She didn't actually believe it. She knew exactly what Wyatt was like when he was drunk, and Aurora's exposed skin was smooth and clean, without any trace of lust. She wasn't stupid, she just thought it was boring. She did love Wyatt, but she had always been restrained. She was not deeply trapped in the quagmire and unable to extricate herself. Love needs careful watering and careful care to bloom into a gorgeous flower. Like her and Wyatt, they are vulnerable. Jonah pulled her hand away from her eyes, held it, brought it to his lips, and gently kissed the back of her hand. Daisy felt like she was struck by lightning when soft lips touched her skin. The two of them were now sitting in the back seat of a moving taxi, and there was no way she could escape. She wanted to pull her hand back, but he held it tightly. Jonah acted coquettishly. "Sister, please let me hold your hand for a while." Daisy pursed her lips, thinking of his pain on that rainy night, and finally stopped struggling. After all, what should I do with him? 35. 1 week passed quickly. Daisy sees Jonah off. "I can't help feeling sad when I think about when we will meet again." She was still nagging Jonah to take care of himself when she was interrupted by Jonah. "I'm afraid I won't be able to do it well, so I'd better trouble you to take care of me in the future." Daisy felt a little melancholy. She also wanted to continue taking care of him, but she never had the chance. Jonah raised his hand to stroke the chawn between her eyebrows and said softly, "I will be back soon after the follow-up examination. Wait for me." Daisy heard this and held out her little finger. Pink. She regretted it right after she finished speaking. It was too childish and unlike what she normally does. Just as she was about to withdraw her hand, Jonah hooked her little finger around it. Hook. The black pupils were clean and clear, reflecting her figure clearly, and there was deep love and smile in his eyes. On the way back, Daisy received a call from Wyatt. He choked up and called her baby, wanting to explain to her, but was it necessary? He was the one who said it was over, and those 2 words seemed so light and insignificant in his eyes. How could he start over now? Jonah went back, which meant Daisy's vacation was over. The next day when she got up early to go to work, the door of the apartment opposite that had been vacant was open, and 3 or 5 workers were moving furniture in. Daisy walked sideways past the man in blue work clothes and thought, "It's finally rented out." The room opposite has been vacant for more than 2 years. It has not been rented out due to the corner problem, but this has nothing to do with her, as she is not very keen on building interpersonal relationships. Unexpectedly, Daisy saw her new neighbor as soon as she got off work that night. He stood at the door and called her pitifully, "Baby." 36. Daisy completely ignored Wyatt. But Wyatt was too thick-skinned and came to harass her every night. After a long time, Daisy was really annoyed. She simply welcomed him into the house and prepared to make things clear. Wyatt sniffed and said with a grin, "Darling, did you stew potatoes and beef brisket? They smell so good." He hasn't eaten Daisy's cooking for a long time. He didn't feel the difference before, but now he's hungry just by smelling the food. Daisy said calmly, "Yeah, want something to eat." He called her baby whenever he saw her recently. She had corrected him before, but he turned a deaf ear to her. Later, Daisy simply ignored her. Wyatt nodded quickly, walked to the dining table with ease, sat down and waited for the meal to start. After dinner, Daisy went to the kitchen to wash the dishes, and Wyatt followed closely behind her. "Wait for me in the living room. I have something to discuss with you." Wyatt's eyes darkened, but he obeyed. After Daisy finished cleaning up and walked into the living room, she saw him sitting obediently on the sofa, wondering what he was thinking about. "Wyatt," she called to him, "stop it. There's no going back." Wyatt's face turned pale and his voice was hoarse. "I know I was wrong. Give me another chance. I love you." This was the first time he said these 3 words. He was not the type of person who would talk about love all the time. 3 years. 3 years without you realizing you love me. Now it's over and you come and tell me you love me? Well, tell me what you love about me. This face. Wyatt was slightly startled. He had never thought about why he loved her. During the 3 years that Daisy had been by his side, She was too well behaved and docile, so docile that he took it for granted that Daisy would never leave. Like light, like air, it exists so reasonably. Very few people would consider what would happen if they lost light or air. Because they think they will not lose anything, they will not consider whether to love or not. Or there is no need to consider it because love is inevitable. Wyatt lowered his head and said, "No." Daisy sighed. "You are just used to being taken care of by me. But that is not love. I am not born to like taking care of others. I am a woman and I also want to be loved and pampered." Speaking of this, she couldn't help but think of the emerald butterfly, and quickly straightened her mind and pulled her thoughts back. "Wyatt, I don't mind it because I did it willingly. As for the reason, you should know it after meeting Jonah. I gave you the compensation I owed him just to have peace of mind, so I don't blame you. But I am also flesh and blood and I feel bad. We both know what you have given me in the past 3 years. What has he ever given? Apart from the 3 million she donated, it seems that there is nothing else." Wyatt's eyes turned red, and his voice became lower and lower. I will change, I will change." Daisy turned her head away and didn't look at him. She said, "We are not children anymore. We can't solve the problem by shedding a few tears. It's over, it's over. Wyatt, let's just do it." Just do it? He wanted to, but his heart ached. It ached. 37. In mid-July, the weather in Chengdu was as hot and stuffy as a steamer. Chengdu Airport. Daisy was standing in the hall in a red dress, waiting for Jonah. She had a graceful figure and a pretty face. Soon, a wheelchair appeared at the exit. The young man sitting on it was so handsome. But the person pushing the wheelchair was replaced by a cute teenage girl instead of a bodyguard. Jonah spotted Daisy in the crowd and waved to her. "Sister, I'm here." The dimples on her cheeks seemed to be filled with intoxicating wine. Daisy smiled unconsciously. The wheelchair quickly approached her, and the girl behind her looked her up and down, then suddenly said, "You look better than in the photo." "Photos? What photos?" Daisy was puzzled. "It's the one in Jonah's wallet. He always..." Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Jonah. "Adeline, shut up." The little girl pursed her lips and said, "Oh," then kept silent. Jonah's face turned red. He pointed at the pouting girl and said to Daisy, "Adeline, my friend's sister, insisted on coming back with me during the summer vacation. Sister, ignore her." Adeline let go of the wheelchair, signaled the bodyguard next to him to push it, ran forward and took Daisy's arm affectionately, and did not forget to make a face at Jonah. "I am so cute that my sister will not ignore me." After saying that, he took Daisy and walked out. The bodyguard pushed Jonah behind the two men. Adeline glanced back and gossiped with Daisy in a low voice. "Sister, do you know that Jonah has a 3-inch photo of you in his wallet? He protects it like a treasure and won't let us touch it. And one time I saw him hiding in his room crying while looking at that photo." The little girl opened and closed her pink lips. "My brother said Jonah loves me very much. Do you love him too?" "Love? Of course, but Daisy herself can't tell whether it is family, friendship, or love." 38. Because Jonah will be living in China in the future, he discussed with Trent and decided to slowly shift their focus back. Trent, Adeline's brother and a partner in Jonah's company, was summoned to Chengdu from the United States by Jonah a week after his sister returned to China with Jonah. Then on the same day, he brought the lightbulb sister who was clinging to Daisy back to the United States. The little girl hugged Daisy and cried. In the end, her brother couldn't stand Jonah's death glare and grabbed her clothes by the back of her neck and tore her off. After sending the crying child away, Daisy pushed Jonah home. He has been doing rehabilitation these days and the results are pretty good. Although he walks very slowly and can't walk very far, he is getting better after all. Jonah is different from Wyatt. When he accompanied Wyatt to do rehabilitation, his temper was not only bad, but also very unstable, and it was difficult to serve him. It was understandable, after all, he was a child of destiny, and it was difficult for anyone to accept it for a while. But Jonah was always gentle. Even if he was grimacing in pain and sweating all over, he would comfort her after the pain passed. "I'm fine, don't worry." He was still a child, but he always took care of her emotions. Daisy felt something was changing in her heart. When she got home, Wyatt was waiting for her at the door, with cigarette butts scattered all over the floor. Daisy frowned slightly, opened the door and pushed Jonah in. She had said everything she needed to say, and now she and Wyatt had nothing to say to each other. Wyatt reached out and held the door frame, stopping her from closing it. "Did you donate the money I gave you?" he asked in a deep voice. Today he received a donation certificate from the Red Cross. The donation amount was $3 million, and the time was the day after he said he would end it. Daisy murmured yeah and ignored him, pushing Jonah into the bedroom. Behind him, Wyatt's voice sounded somewhat painful. Why? Why? Because she was neither a prostitute nor a nanny, and she didn't want to treat the 3 years she had given as a transaction. 39. After a period of rehabilitation, Jonah's condition got better and better. Daisy asked someone to make him a pair of wooden crutches, and he was finally able to get rid of the wheelchair. His thin body also became more voluptuous under Daisy's care. After dinner, Jonah sat in the living room and texted someone. The screen was clicking. Daisy thought he was dealing with work matters and didn't ask any more questions. After a while, he took out the bag from the trash can next to him and tied a knot. Then he stood up and shouted to Daisy, who was cleaning the kitchen. "Sister, I'm going downstairs to take out the trash." Then he went downstairs on crutches. Daisy was not very reassured and followed quietly. Because she had to take the wrong elevator, Jonah was gone when she came down. There is only one road leading to the gate of the community, and Jonah can't walk far because of his poor mobility. Daisy walked forward for a while and found the person. There was another person standing next to him, with long legs and a narrow waist, tall and thin. It was Wyatt. Wyatt pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth, then took out another one and handed it to Jonah. Jonah shook his head and stepped back. "She doesn't like the smell of cigarettes." Wyatt paused, holding the cigarette. He knew who Jonah was referring to. In her memory, it seemed that she would frown slightly every time he smoked, but she never said anything and he didn't care. Daisy, who was eavesdropping, was also touched. She had never told anyone that she disliked the smell of cigarettes. Wyatt put away his cigarette and asked, "What do you want to talk to me about?" Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Well, I hope you won't harass her again." "Harassment? She is mine, how can you say that?" "You should know the limits," Wyatt said in a deep voice, "and stay in her position as a younger brother and wish her happiness." "I can give her happiness, why should I wish for it?" Jonah continued. "Do you know why I came back? When I first knew that you were with her, I thought about giving up. As long as she was happy, I would do anything. But what about you? What did you do? My baby, why should I let others abuse it?" Jonah said the last sentence with great force. Daisy didn't listen to what was said next. Jonah returned home 20 minutes later, walking towards Daisy step by step on his crutches. When they were only one step away, Daisy called for a stop. Jonah always listened to her. Daisy looked at the handsome young man in front of her with picturesque features, took a step forward and threw herself into his arms. She hugged his waist and said in a muffled voice, "You have walked enough. Let me take the last step." End of text. Jonah Extra, the blank years. Jonah is a very stubborn child, stubborn to the point of being paranoid. For example, he loves Daisy. How much did he love her? Well, he should love her to the point of risking his life. So when he saw Daisy was in danger, he pushed her away without hesitation and rolled down from the top of the mountain. Over the years that followed, Chi's mother asked him more than once, "Do you regret it?" The thin young man sitting in the wheelchair just shook his head slightly and said, "No regrets. It's just very painful because she is not around." He vaguely remembered that before he fell into coma, he was held in the arms of a pair of soft and boneless hands, and besides the strong smell of blood, he could also smell a very light scent of jasmine, which was the smell of Daisy's usual shampoo. She choked and called him over and over again. "Jonah, Jonah." A few tears fell on his face, feeling a little cold. Jonah wanted to wipe her tears, comfort her with a smile, and tell her that she was fine and it didn't hurt at all. However, before he could do anything, he was swallowed by darkness. When he regained consciousness, he was in a foreign country without Daisy. I reached into the quilt and pinched my thigh but felt nothing. Although he was in a daze these days, Jonah could still hear what was said from the outside world. "Is it really disabled?" He pinched it again but still felt no pain. However, the wound on his back was torn open by his movements, and the white gauze was stained with blood. "Oh, I am really disabled." Fortunately, I didn't let her see me in such a miserable state. Chi's mother cut off all contact between Jonah and Daisy, and the once gentle and dignified woman became hysterical. After Jonah argued with her several times, Chi's mother finally made concessions, on the condition that he could stand up. It hurt, it really hurt. After that, every treatment was like cramping and bone breaking. Jonah gritted his teeth and persevered every time. Pain was better than numbness. As long as he could stand up, he could go back to her. Sister, wait for me. Without Daisy, Jonah struggled with the pain alone. Fortunately, he always kept a photo of her in his wallet, which was better than nothing and could at least ease the pain of missing her. Year after year, the name engraved on the chest ferments in the wheel of time. His sister in the end couldn't wait for him. The message was given to him by Trent. It was a cloudless day in San Francisco. Jonah held up a photo of Daisy and Wyatt to the sun and said with a smile, "They are a good match." I started to cry as I laughed. He raised his arm and rubbed it with his sleeve, then said, "Today's sun is too strong, it hurts my eyes." Trent patted his shoulder and sighed, barely audible. Jonah still gritted his teeth and actively received treatment every day. Trent asked him, "There is no place for you by her side anymore. Why are you still working so hard?" Jonah looked blankly for a long time before he slowly spoke. "We have a custom where the bride needs to be carried in the wedding car by her brother when she gets married. If I can't marry you, I'll personally send you to someone better. But how can I be willing to accept this? My chest ached so much that I almost suffocated." Jonah still asked Trent to check Wyatt, and they actually found something. Trent placed Aurora's photo in front of Jonah. Jonah just glanced at it, and then crumpled it up with disdain and threw it into the trash can next to him. "This is the thing that made his baby suffer? She doesn't deserve it. Trent, please book me a flight back home in 2 days. Wyatt Extra. A big dream. I'll take care of you from now on, okay?" In the bright hospital lobby, a girl in a white coat squatted and asked the man in a wheelchair in front of her. Tears rolled down her pretty oval face. Wyatt clenched his hands on the armrest, then released them, and then clenched them again. After repeating this several times, he said in a hoarse voice, "Okay, don't cry. Don't cry, Daisy, don't cry." After that day, the disabled young master of the Pearson family had a girl named Daisy by his side. The violent Wyatt also turned back into the elegant gentleman he used to be. Except that he couldn't stand up. His temper was even better than before the accident. But he often stared blankly, staring at Daisy standing in a daze, staring at Daisy sitting in a daze, staring at Daisy cooking in a daze, staring at Daisy eating in a daze. I would often giggle. I would giggle at Daisy who was standing, I would giggle at Daisy who was sitting, I would giggle at Daisy who was cooking, and I would giggle at Daisy who was eating. Then he was pushed to the hospital by Daisy, who was horrified by his look, to have his brain checked. Fortunately, everything was normal. Daisy was relieved. Rehabilitation was painful, and Wyatt grimaced in pain. Daisy helped him sit up and wipe the sweat off his face with a towel. She asked him softly, "Does it hurt?" "It hurts," Wyatt grumbled aggrievedly, with a crystal tear hanging from the corner of his eye. He put his arm around Daisy's waist and buried his head in her abdomen, saying coquettishly, "Baby, hug me." Daisy blushed and pushed his shoulder. "Don't scream, who is your baby?" After pushing twice, she stopped. The clothes on her abdomen were wet and stuck to her skin, which was a bit uncomfortable. After hesitating for a few seconds, she raised her hand and patted his back gently, her voice softening. "Don't cry, does it hurt so much?" Wyatt's voice was slightly hoarse. "Yeah, it hurts. It really hurts." Thanks to Wyatt's cooperation, the rehabilitation was successful. Soon after he was able to walk, the Pearson family held a grand party. Next to Wyatt stood Daisy, who was dressed up. He took Daisy's hand and walked slowly under the spotlight. He held the microphone with tenderness in his eyes and said, "This is my future wife, Daisy. The one and only Daisy who can never be replaced." Later, during some socializing and drinking, someone arranged a princess for Wyatt, and there was a shadow of Daisy in his eyes and eyebrows. Wyatt was slightly dazed and waved it off. "Sorry, my family is very strict." The other party didn't mind and laughed. "I didn't expect Wyatt to be henpecked." Wyatt swirled the red wine in his glass and laughed. "I can't help it. He has a bad temper." The tone was full of pampering and indulgence. For the first time, he felt that the word henpecked sounded so beautiful. Wyatt always jokes around. Everyone in the industry knows that your wife, Mrs. Song, is famous for her gentleness and good temper. Yes, Daisy has a gentle personality and rarely loses her temper. But how many people know how determined she would be to give up a relationship? Wyatt just smiled faintly and drank the glass of red wine. After the social event, Daisy came to pick me up. The tall man hugged the petite woman and kept calling her baby. At the end, his voice was choked. He almost begged, "Baby, I love you so much. Baby, please don't leave me, okay?" Daisy patted his back and said softly, "Okay, don't leave. Let's go home. Go home, our home." Wyatt thought. He would never tell Daisy that he had a very long dream before he met her. In the dream, he was not very kind to her, so in the end, she became a thing of the past that he could never get back. That dream was too real, so real that he couldn't tell which one was true and which one was false. It doesn't matter anymore, at least now she is by his side. Over.